What's up, you sweaty nerds and greasy degenerates? Kafka is arriving in less than 2 days in Honkai Star Rail, and people are wondering, should I build Sampo or should I build Luka? So let's dive into who you may want to pull for or not, because these two characters are presumed to be the best two pairings for Kafka at this time, so let's talk about it. But first of all, if you enjoy the content, maybe consider subscribing, because I found out that 96% of you guys aren't subscribed. Oh my god, do I smell weird? Do I sound weird? Oh my gosh. Maybe just like, I don't know, go down there and just like check to see if you're subscribed or not. I don't know. If you hate me though, leave a hate thread in the comments instead. And I found out today that 10% of y'all are actually women. So, ladies, female representation, let's go. Anyways, back to the video. Okay, so Sampo or Luka. First of all, we're going to do a short synopsis on who you might want to pull for different conditions. Then we're going to talk about Sampo in detail first. Then, after that, Luka. If you want a build guide for Luka and maybe some combat abilities of what he does, I'll put a link to 2 videos down in the pinned comment and the description below, so go check those out if you're interested in more detail about him. And then at the end, I'm going to put a final verdict, a kind of final summary on who I think is maybe better overall and who I think maybe you should pull for different conditions. Just be aware that we're running off of pre-release information for Luka. He's not out yet, and we're also running on the assumption that you are building these characters for a Kafka team because Kafka is built around DOTs, and so are these characters. So let's move forward. So something to remember about these two characters is that Sampo deals a lot of spread damage, and Luka is hyper-focused on a single target enemy. So you have kind of 2 slightly different play styles, even though they both deal DOTs. Luka is going to want to hit one enemy at a time and deal a bunch of damage there, and Sampo is going to want to spread his damage out amongst a bunch of characters. So it's really kind of dependent on what you like to play yourself. Do you want to go for single target, which is going to work well on bosses? But don't forget that a lot of bosses have a lot of adds, meaning there's a lot of waves and mobs that come with a boss. So it's not like Sampo's, not going to work well in a boss scenario. He actually could work very well. We also have a very unique situation with Sampo and Luka in that during Kafka's banner, Sampo and Luka are both available on Kafka's banner, which is very beneficial to anyone building a Kafka team. And you might very well end up not just getting one of these characters, but you might end up getting both of these characters while you're pulling for Kafka, and you might get a whole lot of one of those characters. For example, if you end up pulling like 3 Sampos and you only pull like 1 Luka, it's kind of like a little bit of a no-brainer if you're trying to build for power. You probably want to build that Sampo because the Eidolons will more than likely elevate his gameplay higher than the Luka that you have. Or if you only end up getting like 1 Sampo and 1 Luka, and you have like a really good light cone for Luka, for instance his signature light cone, you may want to consider building your Luka over the Sampo because that might elevate his gameplay higher than the Sampo would be. Now you have to remember we all are working off of pre-release information for Luka, so it is hard to calculate the numbers and compare them fully right now. But as of right now, they both seem potentially relatively on roughly the same level, maybe one slightly above the other in terms of their overall power level. So honestly, if you have like only 1 copy of each and you like one character over the other, play for fun and not necessarily for meta, okay? Have fun, that's the most important part of the game. So build who you want realistically, especially in that scenario, and, screw the rest, okay? So let's go ahead and look into some of Sampo's abilities. We're not going to do like a full build guide or kit guide right now, but we're going to look into what he does so that you might know if you want to build him or not. Because even though Luka and Sampo are similar characters, they have different kind of like play styles and want to be built differently. Sampo wants to be built for a lot of effect hit rate, and Luka wants to be built for a lot of attack percent. Because Sampo has lower chances to apply his DOTs, and Luka has higher chances to apply his DOTs, so they have to be built slightly differently and for different things. Sampo has a lower chance, but he also has a lot of opportunities because he does hit a lot of enemies at once and his attacks are multi-hit. So don't think that just because he has lower base chance means that he's going to be worse. That's simply not true. Now let's go ahead and look into his talent, which I think is the most important part of his entire kit. Sampo's attacks have a 65% base chance to inflict Wind Shear for 3 turns. Enemies inflicted with Wind Shear will take Wind DOT equal to 20% of Sampo's attack at the beginning of each turn. Wind Shear can stack up to 5 times. This is a very, very powerful effect, and just so you know, this is at level 1, so if you increase this talent, it will go up, the 20% will go up. And though that 65% there is not highlighted, if you raise his effect hit rate, this number at 65 will go up, just so you guys are aware. Now let's go ahead and look at his skill, and just so that you guys know, this talent that he has can kind of like synchronize really well with certain light cones that are available for Nihility characters, such as Fermata. Works well off of Wind Shear and DOTs as well, and Fermata is arguably one of the lower end light cones that you can put on him, but even at base level, Fermata is still really, really strong for Luka, and you can craft Fermata to go to Superimposition 5 really easily and be a very, very, very strong cone to use on him if you do it properly. So just be aware of that. He has a very high skill ceiling, very, very low floor, if that makes any sense. Sampo deals wind damage equal to 28% of Sampo's attack to a single enemy, and further deals damage for 4 extra times, with each time dealing wind damage equal to 28% of Sampo's attack to a random enemy. That's basically another DOT. And again, if you raise up his talents, this number will go up. We're not going to talk about his basic attack, because it's just like basically every other character's basic attack. Let's look at his ultimate. It deals wind damage equal to 96% of Sampo's attack to all enemies as an AoE, with a 100% base chance to increase the target's DOT taken by 20% for 2 turns. That's a really, really high amount, and don't forget that if you're raising his effect hit rate to be higher for his talent, for instance, this ultimate is basically going to guarantee, as long as you build like 10.2% effect hit rate on the character, he'll get that, but you're building a lot higher than 10.2% because you want this 65% to go up. So let's go ahead and look at his technique really fast. After Sampo uses his technique, enemies in a set area are inflicted with blind for 10 seconds. Blinded enemies cannot detect your team. When initiating combat against a blinded enemy, there is a 100% fixed chance to delay all enemies' actions by 25%. So that fixed chance doesn't go up, but it doesn't really matter. They're blinded, there's nothing they can really do about it. So this is actually a really, really good ability to use on enemies to start off the battle. However, Kafka's ability is probably better if you have a Kafka team, because she applies like shock to everything, which is really, really strong. So just something to be aware of there. And so we are going to go over Luka quickly here, but if you want some more detailed information about Luka, I do have 2 videos for Luka, build guide and, synergies and what his kit and abilities are, at least for what we know right now. So if you're interested in that, go check the videos in the pinned comment and description down below. But let's talk about Luka's talent really quickly here. Luka's talent has an ability where if he gets 2 stacks of Fighting Will, he gets an enhanced basic attack, which is really good for him, and he starts off the battle with 1 stack of Fighting Will already, and he can get stacks of Fighting Will back from his ultimate. So, when he has this enhanced basic attack and he attacks an enemy, it will automatically deal extra damage to the enemy if they have bleed. Coincidentally, Luka deals bleed damage, and he's very, very good at applying bleed. So more than likely, you're going to be able to get this extra damage off. So that's really, really solid for his talent. And let's go ahead and look at his skill. His skill deals damage to a single target enemy, and in addition to that, it has a 100% base chance of causing the target to bleed for 3 turns. That's based off of pre-release information right now, just so that you know, but that's why he doesn't necessarily need a lot of effect hit rate, because he has a really high chance of making them bleed, and it lasts for 3 turns. And and at the start of each turn, the bleeding enemy will take damage based on their HP, but it's capped by Luka's attack. So just be aware of that. You want to build Luka for really, really high attack percent, because that's going to work really well with his kit, because all of his DOTs work off of his attack percent, and his skill works off of his attack percent as well. With his ultimate, he gives you 2 stacks of Fighting Will, and has a really high base chance of giving the target enemy a DOT for 3 turns, and soon after, they'll take an increased amount of damage as well. So they get the DOT, and they also take some increased damage as a normal ultimate damage as well, based on a high percentage of his attack. So Luka's looking really, really strong, but he's a single target DPS, versus Sampo is a bit of a spread damage DPS. And they have kind of like sub DPS abilities as well because, you know, they're buffing and debuffing based on the scenario that they have with their abilities. So just something to be aware of with those two characters. They're both DOT characters that are kind of like sub DPS characters, but they actually have you know, different abilities. They kind of want to have either effect hit rate for Sampo or high attack percent for Luka. So, who should you build for, Sampo or Luka? Well, something to remember with Luka is that we're working off of pre-release information. So, we can't say 100% definitively how well Luka will perform as of quite yet. They could change something last minute, there could be something we've overlooked with the synergies, so just something to think about. You might actually want to wait for day 1 or day 2 to make a decision on this if you're working towards meta, because there could be better information on day 1 or 2 about Luka and Kafka's synergies that might be important to whether you make a decision for Sampo or Luka. So just something to remember there. And Luka also works for single target, and Sampo works best in a mob situation against multi-targets. So Luka will probably outperform against, you know, single target big bosses and things like that over Sampo, who is probably best for mobs and other things like that. However, something to remember is that Memory of Chaos is typically known as the hardest content in the game because it is, and there are a lot of mobs in Memory of Chaos. So something to consider there. Sampo might outperform Luka a little bit more often in situations like that just because there's a lot of mobs around. And don't forget, a lot of bosses tend to have mobs with them as well. If I had to pick one or the other, based on information we have right now, I'm just going to make an educated guess here. I'm not saying I know for a fact. I'm just saying that I think Sampo will probably outperform Luka, but again, we can't know 100% definitively, and it's mostly just because it is very situational, whether one will be better than the other, to be honest, because don't forget there's also weaknesses. If the enemy's not weak to wind, and they are weak to physical, Luka's definitely going to be better. That's just how it goes. But I think in most scenarios, Sampo will probably outperform Luka just because the game mostly has mobs right now. So that's why I think Sampo will probably be better than Luka based on what we have now. I haven't seen anything that absolutely 100% definitively elevates Luka so much higher above Sampo as of right now, because one thing to remember is the synergies with Kafka. Kafka's going to be detonating DOTs. If you can build Sampo with enough effect hit rate, he's going to apply a ton of DOTs on a lot of enemies. And that means that Kafka's going to detonate all those DOTs a lot of the time. And the faster you clear mobs, the safer you are against that one final boss at the end. So that's why I think that Sampo will probably be better than Luka. That's just a random prediction. Don't hold me to it. But that's just what I would say looking at what we have so far. If this video was entertaining to you in any way, shape, or form, maybe leave a like and subscribe. If you hated it, leave a hate thread in the comments and I'll retaliate by stealing your cookies. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Peace out.